Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by and welcome to part 4 of the Project Orchids updates. This is the cooler, shadier types and the last part for update 3. Next time we look at all this set of plants will be in December, so this will be the last one for a while now, and then we'll revisit them in the depths of winter. Although we do actually have a bit of sunshine today for a change, which is good because everything's soaking wet. Anyway, this is what we're up to. Stuff that lives over here this time round, so I'll dig them out one at a time and we'll have a look at them. First one up is a Masdevallia. This is Copperwing. It was in bloom when I got it and it hasn't done it since. Mind you, I haven't had it that long. But last time we looked at it we had a couple of new growths and a couple of older growths. It hadn't long been potted up in that pot, but it was too low in the pot with not enough root room. So I did actually repot it again at a later date. Chances are that probably set it back. But it didn't have enough root run as it was, so I had to do something with it. So let's see what we did. Now, last time we looked at this one, we had some reasonable sized leaves and a few new ones coming. And it looks like nothing's changed, when in actual fact it has. Because some of those larger leaves actually died off and been replaced by some new ones. So the net effect is it doesn't look much different. I think it's, in effect, I think it's stalled at the moment. It's not growing actively as well as it should, but nonetheless, it's hanging in there. And now that we're getting the cooler nights, quite cool nights, and shorter days with less temperature, hopefully it'll pick up a bit. But all of my cool growers suffer in the summer, and again we had 2 prolonged hot periods during this year, same as we did last year, only not quite as bad. At least they weren't all at once this year. But nonetheless, they don't do as well as they ought to during the summer months. But this is the time of year that they show signs of picking up. So we'll keep our eye on it and we'll see what it looks like next time. The Miltoniopsis we chose was partly because it was a gift, partly because it hadn't bloomed, and at this particular point it was in bloom, and I was over the moon to have finally got a yellow Miltoniopsis. I moaned about not being able to find one for so much, somebody took a piece off of theirs and sent it to me, so I did eventually get a yellow Miltoniopsis, and this was its first blooming, and I was well pleased. It's a lovely rich yellow, a little splash of red in the centre, and I was very pleased. The plant wasn't exactly a strong grower, but nonetheless it hadn't long been repotted. It was sort of getting itself established. On reflection, it might have been a mistake to let it bloom, but there was no way I was going to not see those blooms. What a difference the summer can make to a cool grower. And in this case knocked it for 6. Last time we looked at this it was in bloom, and to all intents and purposes it didn't look too bad, but on closer inspection farther down the line it was actually discovered that there were some unusual markings on the leaves that could be one of several things. That could be a virused plant, as in ring spot, although they don't look quite right. But nonetheless, the leaves are marked, and the plant has lost its vigour that it had. It didn't have a huge amount, being a Miltoniopsis, but it was okay. And its hope is that new growth, which at the moment is growing. It has pushed out a few roots down into the pot, but not many. It objected to being repotted, basically, followed by a blooming, followed by heat. So, but the worry is the marks on the leaves. So it's being kept separate. On the grounds that I don't want it actually physically touching anything else. And now that I've just touched it, I'll have to go and rinse my hands. But quite honestly, if it's viruses are not really spread in such ways. They tend to get in through damaged tissue. So they can get in through bug bite marks, unsterilised tools, you know, things like that. Rather than just touching, it's unusual to spread a virus like that. It's still possible, but unusual. So what I'm doing is watching this closely. This new growth, which has yet to push out many roots. It has pushed out a couple. So that will be its survival or not. That new growth needs to push on, open the leaves, and the leaves need to be okay. And that's a wait and see, I'm afraid. But now that we've got the cooler sort of days and nights and things like that, if it's going to grow, it'll start doing it now. That new growth has been slow to push on, but nonetheless it hasn't stalled, it hasn't rotted, and it still has a good colour. So we'll see how that one progresses. Next time we look at that, it'll be the middle of winter, and that will either have grown or it will have failed by then. So we'll know by then. And the representative of the Draculas was chosen because of the spectacle of its bloom more than anything. It is quite stunning, and it's huge, top to bottom, 6-7 inches, so massive bloom. It has bloomed, but it hasn't done it for a while. And last time we looked at this, some new growths were pushing out, and we had a multitude of spikes hanging down from the pot, and all was looking well. A couple of brown tips on a couple of leaves, but they were actually there when I got it, so they weren't mine as such. It seemed to be doing okay. It seemed to like its open basket, potted in sphagnum moss, and it seemed to be doing pretty good. Let's hope it continued. Now the Dracula has actually grown quite well given its circumstances. It's pushed out quite a few very large, nice new leaves. So this one's growing fine, and it continually tries to bloom and fails. What happens is it pushes out spikes, the bud dies. In this case it extended the spike and the bud died. This one doesn't look very, oh, that one's actually been broken off. But it just keeps pushing spikes out. So it keeps trying, and at some point it's going to make it. I think it's just geared up to, again, just getting cooler. We've got one here. That one looks like it's been broken as well. The trouble is this does get bashed around. So we've got one bud active at the moment that hasn't blasted and is potentially capable of blooming. But as a plant, it's growing well, keeps pushing out new growths, the leaves extend up to their full size, it's doing okay. As a plant, I really can't complain. It's a nice, strong grower, which for the environment it's living in is pretty good stuff. So hopefully we'll get a bloom on this down the line. We've had one, so it is capable of it. But I do believe that was either winter or early spring. It was a while ago anyway. It certainly wasn't in the middle of the summer. So we'll see how we progress with that, and if I get a bloom that actually opens, you'll hear me sing it. Or hear me shout over in the States, I expect, because many have tried and failed, but it keeps trying. That's all you can ask. Now the Restrepia that I chose to represent this group was Hanwha. This came from the Eric Young Foundation, one of the few plants that ever escapes out of there, which I got from my friend Peter White, Orchid Accessories. He had a job lot, I grabbed a couple. And last time we looked at this, it was struggling after a repot to hydrate itself. So we had quite a few crinkled new leaves. That's a sure sign that it's not hydrating. And it can be that the humidity in the air is just too low. But nonetheless, it hadn't long been repotted, and it had come back into growth. It obviously had to put up with the summer, which it doesn't like. So let's have a look and see how that one did. The last time we looked at the Restrepia, it was in the habit of producing leaves like this. When you get distorted leaves that just don't open properly on a Restrepia, it's a combination of two things, one or the other or both. Lack of hydration at the roots, which will often follow a repot, yeah, where the roots have been disturbed. The next few new growths may be a bit distorted, or just lack of air humidity. These are real high humidity lovers. These prefer a humidity up near 90%, which is, you know, if I had 90% in here all the time, loads of the other stuff would just keel over with rot. But these love it. Ideal for things like terrariums and stuff like that, where you can keep that humidity up high. What do we think this is then? Given my given my Oncidium related problem, it's got too much flipping light, hasn't it? But that problem's gone now. These distorted leaves I'm stuck with. I'm not going to cut them off, but we've got new growths coming now, and they're coming out clean, and they're opening, and we do have a bud. It has bloomed a couple of times through the summer. That's what all these tatty bits are. So despite having a distorted leaf, the base of the leaf was still capable of blooming, but this one's starting to show signs of moving a bit quicker now. Again, it will prefer the temperatures at this time of year, and the day lengths and everything are far more suited to where, you know, matching up with where it comes from. So what we're getting now is some nice new growths pushing out. And what we won't get anymore is light affected leaves. Now, these leaves could go back to green. It is possible. But having never got too much light on a Restrepia before, I don't actually know. But what I do know is the new ones are coming out a nice bright green. They're the right colour. They're not distorted. So it's on the mend, shall we say. And it will just appreciate the time of year now, and it should do better. So I'm pleased. It's still hanging in there. It's still with us. Suffered a bit in the heat. Objected a bit to the repot and produced some distorted leaves. But I haven't had leaves dying and drop off. So, you know, they're hanging in there. And as I say, some nice new ones progressing now. That have started over the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks. So it's now coming back into growth. The Paphiopedilum I chose to represent that group was Maudiae, a regular bloomer for me that was split. It was effectively 2 plants just about joined together at the base, not very well. So I split it into 2 separate pots. One of these plants had already bloomed, and the other one was a non-bloomer, expecting it to bloom down the line. So where we started out with 1 plant as a project orchid, I'm now going to maintain the 2, because that's how it's ended up. It was 1 plant, it became 2, so from now on we'll follow both of those plants. One has yet to bloom as a separate plant, the other one has bloomed, and the only way it's going to bloom again is to get a new growth. So let's see how we did with these 2, Mr. Slows. Right, the 2 Paphiopedilums was basically a dual stem plant once upon a time. When it was repotted, it was split into 2. What we actually had was one that had bloomed, which is now pushing up quite a nice new growth. So that'll be its next blooming on that plant. This particular plant that was separated off hadn't actually bloomed, but what it has done now is started to grow. Do I hear weird noises? That's weird noises. And where have you been today? You've been gallivanting, have you? Eh? You've been gallivanting. Naughty cat. They don't come out here causing trouble. Nuisance cat. He'll probably go and eat. You soppy cat? Eh? You soppy cat? What you doing then? What you doing then? Right, where was I? Yes, so this plant, which hasn't actually bloomed yet, is pushing on nicely. Finished off that leaf, pushed on another one, and is starting another one, which is a leaf. So I was just checking to make sure it's not a bud. The plant's big enough to bloom. Obviously this latest growth isn't. So I would expect both of these to bloom down the line. This one will be first. All of my paths seem to be winter bloomers. It's just their cycle, the way they've got into their annual cycle. So this one should bloom. And this one, if it does bloom, it's going to be late. It'll be the other end of winter at the very least. The new growth's nowhere near blooming size yet. So they're coming on. They're doing okay. I believe they've both got roots. They better have. Yeah, we got roots. And active growing tips on that one. And on this one, yep, we got roots with active growing tips. So we got a root system under them, which is the problem I used to have, was basically leaving them in their pots too long. They objected, dumped their roots, and then you've got to try and grow some new ones and keep the plant alive at the same time. Not always easy. So I've got that. These get repotted annually now. I don't care whether they need it or not, they get it done. I'm using small bark and sphagnum moss. The sphagnum moss, because these are kept moist, they do occasionally get dry, but only by accident, not by intention. And as a consequence, the moss breaks down and it'll take the bark with it. It'll turn the whole pot more acidic than these like. So annual repotting for these, for me. And I chose a mounted Phalaenopsis in the cooler, shadier ones, not necessarily cooler, but definitely shadier. This one was in bloom last time, but the still that I took didn't capture the blooms very well, so I put the particular bloom shot up at the same time. This was planted upside down and had produced 2 new leaves, so had a grand total of 4 leaves at this particular point. Root system wasn't that good. It was looking very tired, I'll call it. Still capable of hydrating the plant, but I wouldn't say it was a good root system. It never really grabbed hold of that mount very well. The roots just were held in place by the ties, basically. So not the best of root systems, but we did have blooms at this particular time, and I believe they lasted very well. And the last one, last time we looked at this, it was actually in bloom. This is the one that was mounted upside down and then decided to revert. So the bottom 2 leaves are like upside down. It then produced 2 more that were the right way up, and at the moment it's attempting to push out some more new leaves. I don't think this one's going to grow to its full size. I don't know what this one's going to do. It has produced some new roots, and some of the older roots have branched and grown on. The spike has been left. It's still green. It has a bud on the end that is possibly capable of extending, and the oldest spike down here has also got a branch on it and a possible extension on the end. But it's got a nice root system for a mounted phal, and quite a lot of these roots are new now. So it's now got a much better root system than it had last time. I think the blooms may have taken a bit out of the plant last time. Obviously with a Phalaenopsis they need a constant supply of feed to actually produce blooms and things like that, and some of them will try and produce leaves at the same time, and you don't need much of a gap in your feeding or watering, and especially on a mount. You know, obviously in the warmer weather, this was dry in an hour. That's probably stalled the leaves, and it's sacrificed those to keep those blooms going. But now it hasn't got the blooms. It would probably do the plant the world of good to take the spikes off, quite honestly, which I may well do. And now that it's got some reasonable roots, put the energy into the leaves and get some vegetative growth going and give it a rest. So that's probably what I shall do. But Yeah, I mean, I'm pleased with its roots progress. That's definitely come on nicely, and as I say, as a hanging Phalaenopsis, it doesn't look too bad, but it needs full-size leaves. If it's going to keep producing undersized leaves like that, then it's not happy. It needs the leaves to extend. So spikes off, and we'll see what it does then. So that's that one. So that was part 4. The cooler, shadier types, mixed bunch, and that'll be the last one for a while now in this set. The next lot will be Project Orchids Part 4, and there'll be 1, 2, 3 and 4 again, and we'll revisit them in December. I hope you've enjoyed the little set. For some, that may well have been the first time that they've seen the Project Orchid videos and the way they work. You know, looking at pictures of what they were, whatever it was, 3 months ago, and then looking at a video clip of how they are now. That will be the same format for the set in December. The difference will be that the stills we'll be looking at will be from a year ago in December. So they'll be the pictures that were taken a year prior to the video clip. So it will be a whole growing, well, a whole year including a growing season. So I might do that one slightly differently. I haven't made my mind up yet. But anyway, hope you've enjoyed it, and if it's the first time you've seen the Project Orchids updates, that's the format, that's what they look like, and hopefully we can all look forward to doing it again in December. See you next time. Bye for now.